I first spotted her just after sunrise on a Tuesday, the kind of morning when the fog still hangs low over the fields and the air smells like dew and coffee. I was halfway through feeding the chickens when I noticed a figure moving in my strawberry patch. For a second, I thought it was a deer. But no, deer don't wear wide-brimmed sun hats or carry clipboards. At first, I just watched. She was crouched down between the rows, inspecting the plants like she was judging them in a beauty contest. Every few seconds, she scribbled something on a notepad, muttering under her breath. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but I could tell from her posture that she wasn't there to admire the view. The woman had purpose and attitude. I cleared my throat loud enough for the chickens to scatter. She turned, startled, clutching her clipboard to her chest like I'd caught her stealing state secrets. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice polite but firm. "Can I help you with something?" Her expression softened into what I can only describe as a suburban smile, the kind that stretches wide but never quite reaches the eyes. "Oh, don't mind me," she said sweetly. "I'm just checking things out." "Checking what out exactly?" I asked, stepping closer. The grass was still wet, and I could see where her shoes had already trampled half a dozen ripe strawberries. "This is private property." She gave a light, airy laugh like I'd said something cute instead of serious. "Oh, I know," she said, brushing a leaf off her sleeve. "I live just over there." She gestured vaguely toward the line of tidy houses past the fence. "I like to make sure everything in the neighborhood stays, well, tidy." I blinked at her. "Tidy," I repeated. "You came onto my land because you thought it needed tidying." "Well," she said, looking around pointedly, "you've got some things going on back here. Chickens, a compost pile, some rustic elements. It's all very charming, but sometimes charming can become cluttered." I bit back a laugh. "Ma'am, this is a farm. Clutter is part of the charm." She tilted her head, studying me like she couldn't decide if I was joking or just hopeless. "You'll thank me later," she said at last, and with that, she turned and started walking toward the fence. I stood there, stunned, watching as she stepped right through my beans and didn't even glance back. My rooster let out a crow behind me, as if to say, "You gonna let that slide?" I wasn't sure what to do, chase her down, file a complaint. But then I realized how ridiculous it was to start a war over a woman with a clipboard and a superiority complex. Surely this was a one-time thing. It was. The next morning, I noticed fresh footprints in the dirt. 2 sets, small and deliberate, leading right to the chicken coop. The latch was still locked, but one of the feed buckets had been moved. It was subtle, maybe even innocent, but something about it felt intentional, like a calling card. That afternoon, while I was pulling weeds, I caught sight of her again. This time, she stood just outside the fence, peering in with binoculars. Binoculars. When she noticed me watching, she waved cheerfully and shouted, "Just making sure you're doing all right." I raised a hand in return, too stunned to speak. All I could think was, who does that? By the end of the week, I'd learned her name from my neighbor Sam, who delivered the news like he was announcing a tornado watch. "That's Karen," he said, nodding toward the row of pastel houses at the end of the lane. "She's particular." "Particular?" I asked. He scratched his chin. "Yeah, likes to give advice nobody asked for. One time she told me my mailbox color didn't match my shutters. Then she painted hers red to make a point." I sighed, "So this is normal." "For her, yeah, for everyone else, not really," he grinned. "You might want to put up a sign or something." That night I did exactly that. Big letters, clear message, private farm, please do not enter. I even added a little smiley face at the end to keep it friendly. I planted it right at the edge of the strawberry patch where she'd first appeared. The next morning, I found the sign lying flat on the ground. It hadn't fallen. The post was still solid, the screws tight. Someone had pulled it out and laid it neatly aside as if to say, "Nice try." That's when I realized this wasn't going to stop on its own. Karen didn't just have an opinion, she had a mission. And I was apparently the latest item on her to-fix list. I poured myself a second cup of coffee, looked out over my fields, and decided something important. If she wanted a project, she'd picked the wrong farmer to mess with. I wasn't about to start a fight, but I'd make sure she thought twice before stepping through my strawberries again. By the time Saturday rolled around, I'd convinced myself I was imagining things. Maybe the sign had fallen over in the wind. Maybe the footprints by the coop were just from me or a stray kid cutting through. You tell yourself what you need to keep the peace, right? But peace didn't last long around here. That morning I walked out with a mug of coffee in one hand and a bucket of feed in the other. The sun hadn't been up long and the mist was still lifting off the fields. That's when I heard it, the faint, rhythmic click-click-click of a camera shutter. At first I thought it was my imagination. Then I saw her. Karen stood near the chicken coop, wearing a floral blouse, wide hat, and a pair of gardening gloves that had probably never seen dirt. In one hand she held her trusty clipboard, and in the other, a shiny digital camera. She was snapping pictures of my hens like she was photographing rare birds. I froze. She didn't even look embarrassed this time. She turned slightly, framing the coop from a different angle, muttering, "That's better, much better." "Morning," I called, setting down my coffee before it sloshed onto my boots. "You're out early." She startled, then smiled, the same polite, tight-lipped expression as before. "Oh, hello, I was just admiring your setup." "From inside my fence?" I asked. She blinked as if the concept of boundaries was something new to her. "Well, I didn't think you'd mind," she said. "It's so unconventional back here. I wanted to make sure it's being cared for properly." "Properly," I repeated. "The hens seem happy enough." "They're fine," she said briskly, adjusting her hat. "But see, the thing is," she gestured toward the compost bin, wrinkling her nose. "That's rather close to the coop, don't you think? And the structure," she pointed at my small greenhouse, "isn't painted to match your house. It looks a little out of place." I stared at her, completely speechless. I couldn't decide whether to laugh or start building a moat. "Karen," I said slowly, "this is a farm. Things don't have to match. The tomatoes don't complain." She gave a little laugh that sounded like a hiccup. "Well, you'll see, little details matter. A place should be harmonious." "And you're the harmony inspector, I take it." She didn't like that. Her smile faltered. "I just like things to look nice. We all have to do our part." "Right," I said, nodding. "Well, your part's on the other side of the fence." She pursed her lips, then turned on her heel and walked away, pausing only to snap one last picture of my rooster, who, for the record, was glaring at her like he understood every word. Once she was gone, I stood there for a long moment, coffee forgotten, wondering if I'd just met the human embodiment of a dandelion. Persistent, unwelcome, and impossible to get rid of. That evening I told my neighbor Sam about it while we were leaning on the fence, watching the sun go down. He nearly choked on his beer laughing. "She took pictures of your chickens," he said. "What's next? A full inspection of your scarecrow?" "I wouldn't put it past her," I said. "She acted like I was running some kind of black market vegetable operation." Sam grinned. "You should start charging admission. Farm tour by appointment only, no clipboards allowed." I laughed, but a tiny part of me wasn't joking. Something about the way she'd looked around like she was cataloging everything she saw made me uneasy. It wasn't just nosiness. It was ownership, as if she thought this land was somehow hers to monitor. That night I dug through my shed until I found an old trail camera I'd used during deer season a few years back. The batteries were still good. I set it up by the chicken coop, angled toward the gate, just in case. I told myself it was overkill, but after the sign incident, I didn't trust her not to come back. Sure enough, the next morning, the camera caught something. I scrolled through the footage at my kitchen table, sipping coffee, the chickens clucking outside. Most of it was normal, a rabbit hopping through, the rooster stretching his wings, a gust of wind moving the grass. But then, at 6:12 a.m., there she was. Karen, wearing a pink tracksuit this time, carrying her clipboard like it was an accessory. She didn't see the camera. She crouched by the compost bin, poked at it with a stick, then stood up and took a few more photos. At one point, she even picked up one of the eggs from the coop's nesting box, held it to the light, and put it back. I nearly spat my coffee across the table. She was inspecting my eggs now. I sat there staring at the footage, a mix of disbelief and laughter bubbling up in me. On one hand, it was absurd. On the other, it was personal. That woman had crossed from nosy to full-on intrusive, and I wasn't having it. The next time she came snooping, I decided I wouldn't just catch her. I'd make sure she understood she'd picked the wrong person to pester. I smiled to myself, watching the frozen frame of her crouched by my compost pile. The rooster strutted past her like a security guard on break. "Oh, Karen," I muttered, "you have no idea what's coming." The next morning started like any other, a soft orange sunrise, coffee steaming on the porch rail, the rooster crowing like he owned the place. Everything was calm, peaceful, until I remembered the footage from the day before. Then I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee again. Karen, in her pink tracksuit, poking at my compost like it held the secrets of the universe. Once I stopped laughing, though, something else set in. Not anger exactly, more like curiosity. Why was she so obsessed with my place? It wasn't fancy. My fences were old, my barn leaned slightly to the left, and the only thing shiny around here was the tin roof after it rained. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe she couldn't stand that something didn't fit into her picture-perfect world. So I decided to get creative. If she wanted a show, I'd give her one. That night after dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, sketching out ideas like I was planning a prank war. Step 1, keep recording. Step 2, bait the trap. Step 3, make sure whatever happened next made her think twice about stepping through that gate again. I started with something simple. The next morning, I hung a new sign at the gate, not another "Do not enter" warning, but something friendlier. It read, "Welcome to Sunny Acres. Please enjoy our morning tour. $10 suggested donation." I even set out a little wooden box under the sign, just for fun. I wasn't expecting anyone to actually drop money in it, but I had a feeling she wouldn't be able to resist reading every word. Then I made a few adjustments around the property. Near the compost bin, I planted a plastic garden gnome holding a camera. I painted "Smile" on its little hat. Next to the chicken coop, I set up an empty folding chair with a handwritten note taped to it, reserved for visitors who like to watch. By the time I was done, I was giggling like a kid. If Karen came snooping again, she'd think I'd lost my mind. Maybe that would be enough to scare her off. The following morning, I checked the trail camera again. No Karen. For a brief moment, I thought maybe the message had gotten through, but on the third day, she came back like clockwork. There she was at dawn, stepping through the gate as if she owned it, pausing to read the new sign. She tilted her head, frowned, and then, this was my favorite part, she opened the donation box and looked inside. When she saw it was empty, she shook her head like she was disappointed in humanity. Then she noticed the gnome. She bent down, squinted at it, and actually waved. I swear she waved at the gnome. Then she pointed at the note by the coop and laughed out loud. The camera caught it all. For once, she wasn't scowling or inspecting. She looked amused, like she'd found someone who could play her game. That's when I realized something. Karen didn't just crave control, she craved attention. She wanted to be the main character in every situation, even if it meant being ridiculous. Well, two could play that game. Later that afternoon, I ran into her by chance at the end of the road. I was loading bags of feed into my truck when I heard that unmistakable click of sandals on gravel. "Oh, there you are," she said cheerfully, waving her ever-present clipboard. "I was just passing by. I saw your new sign, very creative." I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Thanks. I figured since people seem to love dropping by uninvited, I might as well make it official." She chuckled. "You're funny. You know, some folks might take offense to me stopping in, but I like to think of myself as community-minded." I raised an eyebrow. "That's one word for it." She grinned as if she didn't notice the edge in my tone. "Anyway, your place is coming along nicely. You might want to trim that ivy, though. It's getting wild." "I like it wild," I said. "I can tell," she replied, and for a moment I couldn't tell if it was a compliment or an insult. Then she waved her clipboard like a farewell flag and walked off, leaving me half amused, half exasperated. That night, I sat on the porch replaying the latest footage on my tablet, sipping lemonade. Watching her poke around, laugh at the gnome, and talk to my scarecrow made me realize something important. This wasn't just a nuisance anymore. It was a story. A strange, hilarious, maddening story that was unfolding right in my backyard. And if she wanted to keep starring in it, I was going to start directing the script. So I went back inside, charged the trail camera battery, and jotted down a few more ideas. Next time, I wasn't just going to catch her snooping. I was going to make sure the whole neighborhood saw what I saw, and maybe, just maybe, she'd finally learn to knock before trespassing. I leaned back in my chair, grinning to myself. "Oh, Karen," I said softly, "you're about to get the full farm experience. If there's one thing about living near town, it's that news travels faster than a summer storm. And by news, I mean gossip. Word of Karen's sunrise strolls through my farm spread in less than a week, and I didn't even have to open my mouth. The footage somehow did that for me. Now I didn't share it, not at first. I just happened to show my neighbor Sam one morning when he stopped by to borrow a rake. He laughed so hard I thought he'd pull something. "She's inspecting your compost like it's a crime scene," he wheezed. "You can't make this stuff up." He must told his wife, who told her sister, who told the hairdresser in town, and by Thursday I was getting questions at the feed store. "Heard you've got a visitor every morning," the clerk said with a grin. "Want us to start charging her for produce?" I laughed it off, but the truth was it bothered me less now. Somehow the more people knew, the funnier it all seemed. It took the sting out of her intrusions, made them almost entertaining. Almost. Still, the fact that she was sneaking in like it was her morning exercise routine didn't sit right. I wanted to stop her without a confrontation. I wanted her to realize she'd gone too far, and I wanted it to happen in a way she'd never forget. That's when the idea came to me. If she loved inspecting so much, I'd give her something worth inspecting. I spent the next 2 days working on my masterpiece. Near the edge of the property, I cleared out a patch of ground that looked like I was preparing to build something. I even laid out a few boards, a wheelbarrow, and a big blue tarp. Then I set up an old wooden crate, half buried in the dirt, and labeled it "Top Secret, Do Not Open." It was childish, sure, but irresistible bait for someone like Karen. She couldn't walk past a crooked flower pot without correcting it. There was no chance she'd ignore a sign that dramatic. To make it even better, I planted a few plastic tubes sticking out of the ground nearby, the kind I used for irrigation. From a distance, it looked like some kind of mysterious project. I figured she'd either lose her mind or break her neck trying to figure it out. I didn't have to wait long. At sunrise the next morning, my trail camera caught her standing right in front of the tarp. She was alone, wearing a jacket this time, probably thinking she was being stealthy. She crouched beside the crate, brushed the dirt away, and tilted her head to read the sign. Then very slowly she lifted the lid. She froze, then jumped back so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. Inside that crate, you see, was a motion-activated rubber snake, a leftover Halloween decoration with a hiss that could scare a grown man half to death. When she lifted the lid, it popped up like a jack-in-the-box from nightmares. The camera caught every second. Her shriek, the way she flailed her clipboard, and how she sprinted all the way back to the fence. I had to pause the footage halfway through, because I was laughing too hard to breathe. For a few glorious days, things were quiet. No new footprints, no mysterious movements near the coop. The rooster strutted around like he'd finally reclaimed his territory, and I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd won. But then came Sunday morning. I was watering the tomatoes when I noticed something shiny stuck in the soil near the fence. It was a pair of sunglasses, the oversized kind with rhinestones on the corners, Karen's. I recognized them from the footage. That meant she'd been back, probably at night this time. I shook my head, picked them up, and set them on the porch rail. If she wanted them back, she could come ask for them properly. Later that day, while I was running errands in town, I stopped by the diner. Sam was there, sipping coffee and smirking before I even sat down. "You did it," he said. "You actually did it." "Did what?" I asked. "The snake thing. She's been telling everyone she was attacked by wildlife." I burst out laughing so loud half the diner turned to look. "Wildlife." She said she opened a suspicious box on your property, which, by the way, she insists was an accident, and a giant serpent jumped out. She's convinced you're harboring dangerous creatures. "Well," I said, grinning, "she's not wrong. I've got chickens, bees, and a rooster with a bad attitude." Sam leaned back, chuckling. "You've started a legend." When I got home, Karen's sunglasses were gone from the porch. In their place sat a note written in neat, looping handwriting. Enjoy your little farm games. Some people might not find them so funny. No signature, of course, but I didn't need one. The loops on those letters were as familiar as her perfume. I tucked the note into my pocket, smiling. If she thought that was going to scare me, she didn't know me at all. Because if she wanted to play games, I was just getting started. The morning after Karen's note, I sat at my kitchen table, rereading her perfect little loops of handwriting. Enjoy your little farm games. Oh, I would. I really would. For weeks, she'd tiptoed around my fields like she was the sheriff of produce, inspecting, judging, meddling. But now the whole neighborhood was buzzing with her snake story. Some believed it, some didn't. Either way, I saw an opportunity. If she wanted attention so badly, I was going to give it to her in a way she'd never forget. So I planned an event. Nothing fancy. Just a simple invitation I printed out on bright yellow paper and posted around the neighborhood. Open farm day at Sunny Acres. Fresh pie, homemade bread, garden tour, and good company. Everyone welcome. Everyone, including her. I made sure to hang one of those flyers on the corner bulletin board where she liked to post her helpful tips about lawn maintenance and recycling schedules. Something told me she checked it daily. Over the next few days, I turned the farm into a picture-perfect postcard. I cleaned the coop, scrubbed the porch, even tied little ribbons around my tomato stakes. The rooster followed me around, suspicious but cooperative, as if he sensed we were preparing for a showdown. By the time Saturday arrived, the sun was shining. The sky was a crisp, endless blue, and my kitchen smelled like heaven, pies cooling on the windowsill, bread rising on the counter, and a pitcher of fresh lemonade chilling in the fridge. I set up folding tables out front, covered them with checkered cloths, and arranged baskets of vegetables like I was staging a country fair. At 10 sharp, the first guests started trickling in. Neighbors I hadn't seen in months wandered up the path, smiling, carrying little jars of jam or fresh flowers. Sam came early, naturally ready to help by taste-testing everything I baked. Soon the place was full laughter chatter, the clink of lemonade glasses. It felt good. The farm looked alive, not messy or unharmonious, as Karen might say, but warm and real. Around noon, I spotted her. She arrived exactly as I imagined, crisp white blouse, wide hat, sunglasses, a new pair, of course, and a smile so polished it could blind you. She hesitated at the gate like she was deciding whether this was an official visit or a social one. "Karen," I called out cheerfully, "glad you could make it." She blinked, clearly thrown off by the welcome. "Oh, well," she said, glancing around. "I thought I'd see what all the fuss was about." "Perfect timing," I said. "Grab a plate, we're just about to cut the pie." She gave a small, polite laugh and stepped in. For once, she looked uncertain, like a cat who'd accidentally walked into a dog park. As people milled around, I started my farm tour. It wasn't formal, just me walking a small group through the garden, pointing out the crops, the coop, the greenhouse. Karen followed along near the back, pretending to be interested while discreetly examining everything. I made sure to pause near the compost pile and my famous top-secret crate, which was now just filled with potting soil and labeled worm experiment. Proceed with curiosity. "Now," I said to the group, "you might heard some rumors about wildlife out here." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Karen's head snapped toward me, her face tightening just a little. "I can assure you," I continued, "the only dangerous creature on this farm is the rooster, and he's more bark than bite. Unless you touch his hens. Then, well, you're on your own." Everyone chuckled, even Karen forced a smile. Then came the grand finale. I led them back toward the tables where I'd set up a little display. On a tablet, looping quietly, was a short video, clips from the trail camera. Nothing malicious, just a quick montage of farm visitors I'd caught on camera. A deer nibbling leaves, a raccoon stealing feed, a rabbit darting past the fence. And then, at the very end, one unmistakable silhouette in us standing by the compost bin. Gasps, then laughter. I raised my hands. "Now, I don't want to name names," I said, grinning, "but whoever this mysterious helper is, she sure loves early mornings." Sam nearly dropped his lemonade. The crowd erupted. Even Corinne laughed, a high, nervous sound that didn't quite match her face. "Well," she said brightly, waving a hand, "someone's having fun with their camera." "Oh, absolutely," I said. "It's amazing what you see when you pay attention." For a moment our eyes met. She knew I knew. And more importantly, she knew everyone else knew too. After that, she stayed for pie, pretending like nothing happened. But she didn't linger. She left with a polite goodbye and a promise to bring something next time. The moment her car disappeared down the road, Sam slapped me on the back. "You," he said, "are a genius." I shrugged, smiling. Just a farmer who believes in transparency. The rest of the afternoon was perfect. Laughter, music, the smell of pie and earth. The tension that had lingered for weeks was gone, replaced by something lighter. That night, after everyone left, I stood by the fence, watching the stars come out. The rooster dozed in the coop, the wind carried the scent of wild mint, and for the first time in a while, the farm felt like mine again. And maybe, just maybe, I thought, it felt a little bit like hers too, not because she owned any of it, but because I'd finally made her see it. A place that doesn't need to be perfect to be good. A place that grows stronger when left alone. For the next few days after farm day, the farm felt unusually peaceful. No extra footprints in the dirt. No mysterious shadows slipping by the fence at dawn. Even the chickens seemed calmer, clucking in that lazy, happy way that only happens when the air's clear and the trouble's gone. I thought maybe, just maybe, Corinne had finally learned her lesson. Then Tuesday morning came and I spotted her walking past my gate. Not through it this time, but past it, slow and deliberate like she was testing the boundary. She had her sunglasses on, a tote bag over her shoulder, and that same air of polite confidence, except now there was something else in her step. A touch of embarrassment, maybe, or wounded pride. I gave her a wave from where I was hoeing the garden. "Morning, Corinne." She hesitated, then waved back. "Lovely day," she said, voice light but careful. "Sure is," I said, smiling. "Perfect day to stay on your own side of the fence." She blinked, then laughed, actually laughed, a small, genuine sound. She said and kept walking. That could have been the end of it, but people like Corinne don't let go easily. By Friday, I'd heard from Sam that she'd been making the rounds again, dropping little comments about farm safety and proper management to anyone who'd listen. According to him, she told the clerk at the grocery store that I had live wildlife roaming freely and might need supervision. I almost wanted to thank her. After all, nothing draws a crowd like a good rumor. So I decided to lean into it. Saturday morning, I baked a few loaves of bread, packed some jars of honey, and set up a small table by the front gate with a sign that said, "Farm fresh, honey, bread, and trouble-free chickens." It was partly a joke, partly a peace offering. Neighbors stopped by throughout the day, curious and friendly. They complimented the setup, bought honey, and asked how the mystery inspector was doing. I told them she'd retired from field work. Everyone laughed. Around lunchtime, I saw Corinne again, this time approaching slowly, eyeing the table from across the road. "Well, look who's back," I called, shading my eyes. "Care for some honey?" She hesitated, then crossed over, that familiar half-smile tugging at her lips. "I thought I'd see what all the commotion was about," she said. "You seem to have become quite the local celebrity." "Guess word travels fast," I said. "You helped with that, you know." She pressed her lips together, pretending not to hear the jab. "Your display is charming," she said finally. "A little rustic, but nice." "Thanks," I said. "I figured if people are going to talk about the farm, they might as well take something sweet home with them." For a moment, something shifted in her expression. Maybe guilt, maybe grudging respect. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small jar of jam. The label said Blackberry Bliss, made with love. "I made this," she said, setting it on the table. "For you." I blinked. "You made this?" She nodded. "Well, my friend helped, but yes, consider it a neighborly gesture." I took the jar, surprised. "Thank you, Corinne." "Of course," she said, her smile warming a little. "It's the least I could do, considering the misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I repeated, amused. "That what we're calling it?" Her cheeks flushed just slightly. Let's just say I may have overstepped. I couldn't help but laugh. You think? She laughed too this time, and for the first time since she'd wandered into my strawberry patch months ago, it didn't feel like we were on opposite sides of a fence. Just two neighbors, awkwardly trying to figure out how to coexist. After that, she started to wave more often when she passed by. Sometimes she'd even stop to chat about the weather, the price of eggs, or the tomatoes in her own yard. She never mentioned the trail camera or the snake or the farm day mystery footage. And I never brought them up either. Some things were better left as legends. Still, I kept the camera running. Not because I expected her back, but because habits are hard to break. And maybe, deep down, I found it funny that somewhere on my hard drive was an entire highlight reel of one woman's slow descent into garden obsession. One evening near sunset, I caught her standing at the far end of the fence line looking at the fields. She didn't see me at first. She just stood there quietly, hands clasped, eyes soft. Then she spotted me and gave a small wave. "It really is beautiful here," she said. "Thank you," I said. "It grows on you." She nodded, smiled, and walked away. That night, I opened her jar of blackberry jam and spread it on a slice of warm bread. It was sweet, tart, and just a little messy, the kind of flavor that surprises you. I had to laugh. Somehow, against all odds, Karen had managed to bake herself right into my story, and maybe, in her own strange way, she'd learned what this place was about. It wasn't about order, or control, or everything matching perfectly. It was about growth, and sometimes growth looks like chaos until you step back far enough to see what it's turning into. The morning after I tried Karen's jam, I found something new waiting on my porch. It wasn't another clipboard or a note written in fancy loops this time, just a small basket covered with a checkered cloth. Underneath were 3 jars of jam, a small loaf of bread, and a card that said simply, "For a neighbor with patience, thank you." I smiled. It wasn't quite an apology in words, but it didn't need to be. Sometimes peace comes in the shape of a homemade gift. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The farm had been quiet lately, calm in a way I hadn't realized I'd missed. The rooster still crowed before sunrise, the wind still rattled the corn stalks, and the sound of gravel crunching under tires didn't send me running to check the gate anymore. Life was finding its rhythm again. But something interesting started happening after the farm day. People began showing up more often, not to gossip or snoop, but to visit. They'd bring small things, a jar of pickles, a handful of wild flowers, or fresh eggs. They'd ask questions about planting or composting or raising chickens. It was as if one day of openness had turned my little farm into the heart of our quiet street. And to my surprise, Karen came too. At first, she just walked by, waving politely. Then one afternoon, she stopped near the gate, holding a bag of what looked like gardening tools. I leaned against the fence, curious. "Starting a project?" I asked. She smiled, a real unguarded smile this time. "Yes, I thought I'd plant some herbs along my walkway, nothing fancy, just rosemary and thyme." "Good choice," I said. "Hard to mess those up." "I'll try not to," she said with a light laugh. It was strange, in a good way, seeing her like that. Gone was the rigid posture and the squinting, judgmental glances. She looked relaxed, like someone who'd finally realized the world didn't crumble if a fence post leaned a little. Later that week she came by again. This time she brought muffins. "Blueberry," she said, setting them on the table. "Still working on the recipe." "Well, if you need a taste tester," I said, taking one. "I happen to have a very refined palate." She rolled her eyes but smiled. "Be honest." I took a bite. They were slightly overdone but sweet. "Perfectly imperfect," I said. Her eyes softened. "I'll take that." From then on, she started stopping by more often. Sometimes she'd ask for gardening advice, sometimes she'd drop off a baked good, and sometimes she'd just chat for a few minutes before heading off. The fence that had once divided us was slowly turning into something else, a line of conversation instead of conflict. One day, I asked her what made her change. She thought about it for a long moment before answering. "You ever get so caught up trying to make everything look right that you forget to enjoy it?" she said quietly. That was me, always correcting, fixing, inspecting. I thought I was helping, but I guess I wasn't really seeing. I nodded. Happens to the best of us. She looked out over the fields, the rows of vegetables, the trees swaying in the breeze, the little imperfections that made it all feel alive. I used to think this place was messy, she said. Now I think it's honest. That word stuck with me, honest. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea and thought about how much things had changed. The farm was still the same in all the ways that mattered, a little wild, a little stubborn, full of surprises. But the air felt lighter now, the tension gone. Even the other neighbors noticed. People who used to keep to themselves were chatting again. Sam started a weekend cookout tradition. The local kids helped pick strawberries in exchange for lemonade. Somehow, the same land that had caused friction had turned into something that brought everyone together. And Karen, well, she became a part of that too. She wasn't the self-appointed enforcer anymore. She was just Karen, the lady with the herb garden who made jam and told funny stories about her first disastrous attempt at composting. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she stopped by carrying a basket of fresh herbs. "For your kitchen," she said. "Thought you might like a little time to go with all that patience." I laughed. "You're getting good at this whole peace offering thing." "Practice makes perfect," she said with a wink. As she walked away, I watched the light catch on her white hat and felt something I hadn't expected, gratitude. For the chaos she brought. For the lesson hidden inside it. For the reminder that sometimes the people who frustrate us the most end up teaching us the most about ourselves. When I went inside later, I placed her herbs on the windowsill next to the jar of her blackberry jam. The two of them, the green and the purple, sat side by side in the soft light, looking perfectly at home. And I thought maybe that's what it means to live well with others. Not perfection, not control, just learning how to share the same sunlight without getting in each other's way. By the time autumn rolled in, the farm had found its rhythm again. The air carried that familiar crisp scent of apples and soil, and every sunrise painted the fields in gold. The rows of pumpkins glowed like tiny lanterns, and the last of the tomatoes clung stubbornly to their vines, refusing to say goodbye to summer. Life had settled into a kind of peace, the quiet, steady kind that feels earned. I hadn't seen Karen much lately, but every so often I'd spot her out front, tending to her herb garden. She wore her tilted just so, humming to herself while she worked. It was a strange sight, considering that months ago she couldn't step into a patch of grass without pointing out something off. Now she had dirt under her fingernails and a smile that looked, for once, completely genuine. I'd like to say I didn't miss our little back and forths, but truthfully, part of me did. There was something oddly entertaining about watching her fuss over my fence lines or pretend not to trespass. But I was glad she'd learned her lesson, and I suspected, in her own way, she was glad too. One cool morning, as I was stacking firewood, I heard her voice from across the fence. "Your rooster's loud today," she called. I turned, grinning. "He's got opinions." She laughed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Don't we all?" She walked over to the fence, holding a basket filled with herbs and a few small pumpkins. "Thought you might like these. The rosemary really took off this year." I took the basket and gave a low whistle. "You've got a green thumb after all." "Apparently so," she said. "You were right about letting things grow a little wild. It's freeing." That word hung in the air, freeing. It was strange how we'd both changed in ways neither of us had planned. I'd learned patience, she'd learned to loosen her grip, and somehow, between the two of us, the whole street had softened a little. Later that week, she surprised me again. I came home from town to find her standing by my gate, talking with Sam and a few other neighbors. They were laughing about the farm day fiasco, as they called it now. Someone even asked if I'd do another one next year. Karen turned to me when I walked up. "Well," she asked, that old spark in her eye, "shall we?" "Only if you promise not to bring your measuring tape," I said. "Deal," she replied, smiling. And just like that, the thing that had once caused so much tension turned into a running joke, a shared memory that brought people together instead of driving them apart. That second farm day was even better than the first. Kids chased chickens, Sam manned the grill, and Corinne, believe it or not, ran the pie table. She wore a little apron that said Herb Queen, a gift from one of the neighbors. Every time someone complimented her jam, she'd glance my way and say, "Well, I had a good teacher." Near the end of the day, after everyone had eaten their fill, she stood next to me by the fence, watching the sun set over the fields. The light was soft and orange, painting everything in warmth. "You know," she said, "I used to think this place was chaotic, but now I think it's alive. There's a difference." I smiled. "I'll take alive any day." She nodded. "You were right about a lot of things, more than I wanted to admit." "Now that's a first," I teased. She rolled her eyes but laughed. "Don't get used to it." We stood there in easy silence for a while, the sounds of laughter drifting across the yard. Then she said, almost to herself, "Funny how things turn out. I came here thinking I needed to teach people how to live neatly. Turns out I was the one who needed teaching." I looked at her, surprised by the honesty in her voice. "Well," I said softly, "you learned the lesson better than most." She smiled, her eyes kind. "And you taught it better than you know." That night, after everyone left, I sat on the porch with a slice of pie and thought about everything that had happened since the day she first wandered onto my land with that measuring tape. Back then, I'd seen her as nothing but a nuisance, a storm that wouldn't quit blowing. But now I realized something. Sometimes storms clear the air. Sometimes they make things grow stronger. As the crickets sang and the stars came out, I felt a kind of peace that went deeper than quiet, the kind that comes from knowing that no matter how people start out, they can change. That fences can turn into meeting places, and that sometimes the best lessons aren't about proving someone wrong. They're about showing them another way to see the world. Before heading inside, I looked toward Corinne's house. Her kitchen window glowed softly, and for a moment I could see her silhouette moving inside, humming, probably preparing another batch of jam. I smiled, shaking my head. If she ever did forget the lesson, I had a feeling her blackberry bushes, and my trail camera would be right there to remind her. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.